All right, good evening, everyone. Today is Monday, April 10th. I've got 7:04. Apologies for the delay. I'd like to call the meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order. We will start with a couple of discussion items. Number one, the Sidewalk Maintenance Program update. Good evening, Director.
Good evening. Just going to provide an update on the 2022 sidewalk program. A little bit of general history. About a month ago, we provided notice to residents in the revised 2022 program area of their defects and associated scope of work and probable cost for corrective action. We've logged about 65 resident inquiries related to the sidewalk program. Most of those were related to not having enough time to procure a contractor, get multiple quotes, and enter into contract, as well as get the construction underway pursuant to 52106, granting 105 days for overall completion. Seeing that, hearing that from residents, at the March 27th meeting, I recommended a pause of the 2022 program. Better put, more or less taking the foot off the accelerator, giving property owners additional time to make contact with contractors, get price quotes, engage with the city in regards to if they have questions related to why was this panel marked defective, what options are otherwise available. So we've been meeting with residents over the last couple Wednesdays to go over that in finer detail. But the overall pause was more or less taking the foot off the accelerator, having the opportunity for the residents to engage with the contractors, give them more time to assess the situation and get a contractor on board to self-perform the work should they choose to do so. So the intent going forward is to continue with the 2022 program, giving the residents more time to, again, get that contractor on board if they wish to opt out and perform the work themselves. Otherwise, then move forward with letting a contract to pursue the work. Likely, we would advertise that work January, February of 2024 for that work to occur in the spring, summer of 24. So with that, I will open the floor to any questions. Furthermore, I would like to note that we engaged a third-party consultant, Cole, to do a citywide assessment. They started that activity last week. We anticipate getting a pilot of that information available to us in the month of May to take a look at the source data, how that relates to the 2022 program, so that we can more or less do a quality assurance, quality control check on the field inspections versus what the data is presenting from the 3D laser scan. So that's a general update in regards to the program, and we'll entertain any questions.
I would add, Cole has already been out. We did a post last week. If you see people on a Segway, that would be the contractor from Cole. So they've already begun that work as of last week, right?
That is correct. And coming up next week, actually Friday, they'll be mobilizing our street pavement rating vendor. Will be moving into town to conduct the assessment of the pavement rating. So as we go forward, we're going to try to pair up roadway improvements with the sidewalk improvements, so capturing that data and having that available for us to make more informative decisions as we move forward with our street repair, street maintenance, and sidewalk maintenance programs, that they coincide with one another.
Thank you, Director. Questions from colleagues? Ms. Bowers.
Just to make sure I understand, Director, and thank you. So for the 2022 street sidewalk program that we had previously voted to reduce the scope of the parcels, what you're coming before council is to say that the timeline and the deadlines for that scope, that 2022 program, is being lengthened,
Correct.
and that there's no action that's required from council because that's just administrative determination.
Correct.
Okay. And then the work that's being done by Cole now, so we'll have some type of raw data within a month or two?
Likely mid-May to evaluate against the field inspections that were previously done.
Okay. And do we have a sense of what our sidewalk maintenance program area scope would be for that next cycle?
So we can take some of the balance of what was previously envisioned for the 2022 program. We could utilize that. We can utilize the coal information. We can take an evaluation of proximity to schools, to parks, and prioritize based off of location as well. So we'll have the information for citywide available to us to make informative decisions, as well as pairing that and partnering that up with our street maintenance and street reconstruction activities.
Okay. One of the discussion items that kind of came out of last committee of the whole discussion on this was expanded opportunities or vehicles for greater affordability for our residents. Do you anticipate that that will be a future discussion that will come forward to us, or where are we with that process, that question?
We're going to look into what our best practices, what other peer communities are otherwise doing in that area, and come back with a recommendation that could potentially be code modifications or policy updates.
And if I could just tag on to that, just to hit the reset button a little bit. I don't want to hate using that word. I don't want to sound like pause was used. Reset sounds like we're starting all over again. But just to rewind to how we got here, because many residents don't understand, we had a finding that was issued against the city in October of 2019. So under prior administration, there was a finding from the federal government issued against the city for not having ADA compliant sidewalks. My first day in office is when I found out our answer to that finding was due the following week. So we had to get an answer together, and then we had to work with the federal government to come up with a plan as to how we were going to address sidewalk maintenance within the city of Gahanna. That led then to the next 18 months of trying to come up with a sidewalk program. I knew we had multiple workshops with council that were held via Teams because we were in COVID at that point. Just working through different options, everything from sidewalk code violations and how that compared to potential sidewalk maintenance program, how those would mesh or not mesh together, and then ultimately culminating in the sidewalk program, I believe, that was eventually adopted, I think, in June of 2021. And it was intended to be an affordability tool for residents to be able to keep up with the state mandated responsibility that sidewalk maintenance is the responsibility of the property owner / homeowner. So that was the genesis of the sidewalk maintenance program. We said, and we knew when we rolled out the program in 2021, that until we actually saw it go through a cycle from beginning to end, we would not know where the landmines, so to speak, were, that there would be unintended consequences that we knew we were going to have to go back and retweak. What was working, what wasn't working, what were the timeframes. This is now where we're seeing those things. As we're watching the first cycle go through, to go back and to understand that there are some things that we need to address. Certainly the timelines that were set forth in code are a significant problem, and I think probably exacerbated by the growth that's happening in the region around us right now. I think that's making it worse. So appreciate having the flexibility. Thank you, council, for your understanding to just extend those deadlines right now so that we can allow residents a little bit more time to actually make a fully informed decision as to whether they want to opt in, opt out, and then decide to participate in the program that way, whether they want to self-remedy. And then I know Councilwoman McGregor, I think at maybe the last meeting we discussed this, asked about the 5-year assessment. Is it 5 years? Should it be extended? And having the opportunity to examine that. Keeping in mind what the spirit of the program was intended to be, an affordability tool for our residents that we could use, issue $12 to put toward to help with that. but ultimately creating a sustainable program for us as a city to be able to continue for years to come. So just wanted to kind of remind everybody, for residents who might be listening, what the genesis of this program is and what the overall goal is from certainly the administration standpoint, but I believe council's will as well.
Thank you, Mayor, for that history. I appreciate it. One more from Ms. Bowers. Is that right? Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, where I wanted to kind of go next, and just to make sure I understand, is the sidewalk, we're talking specifically about the sidewalk maintenance program and expanding and extending deadlines that were originally created because we have better information about this timeline process now. So turning more a little bit to sidewalk code enforcement, as kind of related but not the same, a few questions on that line. Is Cole going to help us better identify, better collect data around code violations so that we can be more handle that differently, or not?
So the information obtained from the Cole technology will indicate where there are ADA defects that otherwise need corrective action. So we'll have that baseline citywide, and where there are issues, then we'll have the opportunity to take corrective action.
And are we considering extending compliance timeframe for residents who are subject to a code violation who are not in a program area?
So I cannot speak directly to that. However, I would say that the similar flexibility in regards to whether that resident that is served a citation is given ample time to, as long as they're showing good faith effort and making means to get a contractor on board and have the work performed, as opposed to just laying low and not having any progress being made. So from the code enforcement side of things, that would think that that's the approach.
You're exactly correct, Director. That has been the approach that the Code Enforcement Division has taken in consultation with the city attorney, that as long as the resident who receives a citation is in communication with the Code Enforcement Division, that they're working toward trying to find a contractor, that they intend to fix it, that they're again, as Director Comling just said, exhibiting good faith and trying to make those repairs. We're going to continue to keep in contact with them, but allow them the flexibility, given the challenges that people are having right now with contractors who also aren't necessarily up to date on what the code does and does not require, making sure that those contractors know what Gahanna code says and does not say as well, has been extremely critical as well. And I know, because I think we had a street not too far from City Hall that had about 40 sidewalk violations issued last year, and I know we were working with residents on that.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Renner.
No, thank you. Ms. Bowers asked my question. I'm the one that actually brought it up the last time we talked about it, so I just wanted to follow up and find out where are we on that. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Padova.
So thank you for the updates and kind of the history, as well, as I wasn't on council when all of this started. With the information that we're getting from Cole, I'm curious to know kind of how is that going to be delivered to us, and how can we use that to help us plan for the future? But also, I think more importantly, how can we use that to help our residents plan for the future, to know that they have an issue with their sidewalk and they could, be in the sidewalk program in 4 years or 5 years, so that then they can plan for that themselves and hopefully get some of the work done on themselves rather than having to be in this sidewalk program. I know that some neighborhoods have taken it upon themselves to get together and kind of fix some of their sidewalks. And I think that if we could encourage that, or give them the tools to be able to know that and see that, oh, okay, our street, there's a lot of issues on our street, maybe everybody would want to get together and try to do this ourselves. So is there a way that you're planning, do we have a plan for using that data to do something like that?
So We will receive the information in a GIS deliverable, so it'll be, everything will be geo-referenced. So again, we anticipate getting a pilot deliverable of a target area in May, and we'll evaluate the deliverables in regards to its capabilities of producing on a parcel-by-parcel basis what the defects are on a given parcel, as well as from intersection to intersection, to have a comprehensive understanding of how profound is a particular issue on a particular roadway, again, from intersection to intersection, to make informative decisions as it relates to, well, is it best to reconstruct the entire facility because a vast majority of the sidewalk in that area is has significant defects, or the condition of the sidewalk itself is in disrepair, that now is the opportune time to actually take corrective action and build brand new a pedestrian accommodating facility that meets all ADA requirements to the extent practical.
Thank you.
Mrs. McGregor.
So the code sets forth deadlines once you've issued a letter, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so what you've done, when you sent the letter out, that set in place deadlines that had to be met. So what you did was rescind the letter, so now there's no deadlines in place. And at some point in the future, you'll issue another letter which will set deadlines from that point.
Correct.
Okay. Do you foresee a time where maybe we need to change the code so that the deadlines are different?
Yes.
Because we've done that once already. The other thing I was wondering, is there a way to, and when you're looking at areas to do, do we have a way of knowing an area where somebody maybe who has mobility issues, like maybe they're blind, or maybe they have a child they walk with a wheelchair all the time, of targeting some of those areas so that, I mean, we could hit them first? I mean, if we're choosing an area, I mean, that might be a way to, I don't know that we have a way to know that, but I mean, if, like in our neighborhood, we used to have a child who was, well, we still do, wheelchair bound, and so when they did the ADA ramps at that time, they did those in our neighborhood first, because that facilitated his mom walking him all over the neighborhood. But could we do that, something like that maybe? I mean, it's a consideration.
It's a great consideration. It's a matter of having the data in regards to where those individuals reside to be able to make that informative decision related to where we otherwise put those dollars first.
Okay. I think that's all.
Mr. Renner.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on something that Ms. Padova was actually talking about, that, you know, neighborhoods may be getting together. I am already aware that some residents are downloading our program and actually taking an active interest in wanting to do it. And my mantra is always, talk to the city, talk to the city. And it's more than that, because I want them to make sure that if they even go so far as to get a contractor, have the contractor talk to the city. As you know, the City of Columbus has a place on their website, you can download spec sheets for all sorts of stuff, most notably sidewalks. Do we have something like that available yet, or is there something that we can give people what the specs are, or are we aiming to do that?
For the most part, we follow the City of Columbus standard detail drawings as it relates to sidewalks, so we reference those within our standard specifications.
Awesome. Succinct, thank you.
I would,
Ms. Angela.
you mentioned before, the schools, as well as all of the various, you know, people that have their, let's just go with the schools at this point. Are those going to be first as well, because of the fact that all the children being around that, as well as going into, you know, people in Creekside and all those things? Are those going to be also put on a?
So to answer your question, I believe with having it, the information in a GIS format and understanding where schools, parks, places of worship, where we would like to weight particular areas due to proximity, we'll have the capability of doing that.
Thank you.
Anything else on this item? I should say. All right, thank you very much, Director. Next item, capital improvement plan. Good evening, Director Schultz.
You guys don't want a 825 update? No? Just capital improvement? No, it's just capital improvement, sir. I'm just joking with you.
We love an update, but I just have capital improvement.
No, absolutely. I apologize. Just pull up my presentation here. Thank you, folks. No, it's actually a little refreshing not to be here to talk about 825 and talk about something else that has been, I guess, a labor of love, I can say, maybe, over the last little bit that we've been putting things together. But yes, this evening we're here to talk about and introduce you folks to the 2023 capital improvement plan that you folks have heard so much about over the last few months and such. So basically what we're going to do tonight, we're going to run through, in large part, we're going to run through the capital improvement plan and the table of contents and what it's intended to do as a plan document. We're not going to necessarily this evening get into a lot of specifics about individual projects and such, but what process does the capital improvement plan really put before us as an administration, as a council, as a community, in order to make better informed decisions about how capital dollars should be spent. So, you know, we'll start with a basic definition of what a capital improvement plan is, right? Capital improvement plan is intended to identify, plan, prioritize all major investments that support city core functions. And those core functions are largely defined as, excuse me, city infrastructure, obviously roads, bridges, utility infrastructure, but also parks and recreation facilities, other equipment that we might use in order to lift a truck or respond from a public safety standpoint. And we're going to get into a lot of these differences, not these differences, but a lot of these things as we walk through this evening's presentation. I will say that for many of you that are familiar with the CNA, it's going to look a little bit similar to a CNA, capital needs assessment, right? But the capital needs assessment was really, you know, largely a collection of projects, right? It wasn't as, I guess what I'm going to use an air quote maybe, as scientific as what a capital improvement plan should be or is going to be moving forward. So the CNA largely lacked the sufficient detail to be the guiding document that gave the administration and council the ability to make better informed decisions as it related to capital improvements throughout the city. I'll also make the note that capital maintenance is also part of, and a big part of, the capital improvement plan, right? Capital improvement plan is not just about new shiny things, if you would. It's also about taking care of and doing the care and feeding of the existing infrastructure and the existing assets that we have, which in many instances, given the condition of some of those assets throughout the city, is maybe more important than the new stuff, if you would. But this plan is to organize our thoughts and feelings about and to prioritize our thoughts and feelings around the strategic investment, the strategic investments that the city should be making over time. So one of the big things that the capital improvement plan does is it really goes in and it identifies projects, and it identifies projects that are largely already vetted, identified, prioritized in many of the different plans. We only go back to 2016 in the Go Forward Gahanna plan, but anybody that was involved in that plan knew the strategic work that it took in order to put that plan together and identify the needs, wants, and desires of the community from a strategic standpoint, right? Well, there's outgrowths of that, and different projects are born from that. Same thing with the 2019 the land use plan, the thoroughfare plan, easy for me to say, the ADA transition plan when it relates to sidewalks and what Mr. Comlank was just talking about, right? All the way up to the Parks Master Plan. So a few weeks ago, when Director Farrell and Prose was here talking about the Parks Master Plan. The Parks Master Plan largely did that community survey work and informed the CIP as to what should be in the CIP in what specific years and in what specific capacities in order to meet, again, those needs, wants, and desires of the city as it related to those quality of life issues around parks and recreation. A lot of these plans up here, almost all of these plans up here, have some type of public engagement component, right? They do community surveys, focus groups, community engagements, other public participation events that ultimately get and inform the CIP. So as we continue down, the plan really categorizes these different projects into these, 6 different categories. So transportation and mobility. You'd see roads, bridges, pedestrian infrastructure like sidewalks in this particular group. I should also note that there are other subgroups to this. Utility systems. So utility systems in the subgroups for utility systems, water, storm sewers, sanitary sewer. Parks and Recreation has 4 or 5 different breakouts as well, right? So when we talk about how their plan or their portion of the CIP is organized, they break their plan out into play elements and surfacing. So different, playground equipment and the surfaces that we heard that are so important, right? That meet the standards of playground equipment, but then parks and trails and improvements to parks and trails. The projects are organized. Park renovations, pool infrastructure, the street tree program is also inside of the capital improvement plan, right? So it's a collection of these things, and they're organized in these various different categories, up to and including city facilities. 825 obviously is organized in the CIP as a city facility. Creekside is another example. Creekside Garage is a facility. And then we have some other more simpler things, I guess we can call them. They're not as complex of projects, but equipment. Equipment like police equipment and the radios that the officers all wear, right? We're going to hear from Chief Spence later tonight on one of his action items. One of those action items is actually inside of the CNA and then inside of the CIP for the replacement of his radio equipment. And then the technology program, right? We have all this wonderful technology that floats around here, servers and storage area equipment, the Gahanna fiber network, right? That's all organized inside of the CIP under the technology program. Project priorities, many of you that are familiar with the CNAs, you'd also be familiar with the project priorities, right? Where it wasn't broke, we didn't necessarily go and try and fix it, if you would. But we wanted to leverage and build upon the CNAs that everybody was so familiar with reading and utilizing over the years. I guess one of the things that I would say about the project priorities is that the document comes with some additional guidance on how an administration, and when we get into the deeper parts of the document here, as the CIP Advisory Committee can use these ratings in order to properly prioritize projects into the various different categories. So priority 1 are must-do items. They're essential, right? Priority 2 items are should-dos, and then we get down to priority 3s, which we could-dos. So those are the must-haves all the way down to the we'd-like-to-haves. But then there's also another item, which is capital maintenance. And this is where some of the document and the complexity of the document really begins to be shown, right? We have, again, I'm going to use the police radio equipment. That is technically under the capital maintenance and life cycle type plan item, but it is also a priority 1 and a must-do, right? The state's making some changes to their radio network, and the radios must be able to communicate when a police officer or emergency responder is in a particular situation, and therefore the need to upgrade the radios, right? So this is not it is a living, breathing document, if you would, and it's a document that it should consistently change and be updated for things like priority, and this portion of the document really steps us through how we as an administration, and again, you guys as a council, have the ability to do that. So then budgeting and schedule, right? This is all within section 1 of the document. Budgeting and scheduling on the CIP is paramount to the success of the plan, if you would, right? We have limited resources, limited funds in order to do a lot of work, right? So how do we prioritize year to year to year in order to maximize maximize the resources that the city has available to it in order to upgrade core infrastructure and get the benefits out of issue $12 and other capital funds for residents to begin to see those benefits, right? So we want to avoid placing undue limitations on the resources that could be used for other projects, right? So we don't want to, in the CNA days, I think we tied up some funds because we would drop a project in and we'd said it was going to cost $1 million to do this project, but we weren't necessarily ready to start that project for 2 or 3 years out. This plan identifies those projects, puts them in the right place inside of the plan, and then allocates funds appropriately and doesn't tie those funds up unnecessarily, right? So as we continue to step through, the capital budget is the annual event. So for 2023, you folks, back in 2022, you folks adopted the 23 capital budget, right? So we are currently functioning under that 2023 capital budget. And each and every year, that budget is adopted with the operating budget. All right, this process here doesn't change. We will pick up the elements that are in in this instance, the 2024 capital budget, and we will present those to you folks during the budget process. And you guys will adopt it as if it came and got pulled right directly up out of this plan. So there won't be anything in the 24 capital budget that you will not see reflected in this particular plan when the time is right there. From a funding mechanism standpoint, right, we talk a lot about the capital funds in issue 12, but issue 12 is not the only funding mechanism in which we have to fund projects. Obviously, we have special revenue funds, we have proprietary funds, so water and sewer fees that are assessed as part of your water and sewer bill. Local funding, other local funding sources, such as special assessments, the business improvement district, private grants or donations could also could be part of this, right? So it's not about the limited resource of issue $12. It's also about the other resources that the city has available in order to do and upgrade a lot of the infrastructure that is in need of being upgraded. We have TIFs. We talk a lot about TIFs, and then obviously wherever practical or ever purposeful. The city always goes after grant funding in order to do a variety of different things. Price Roadhouse is a good example of that, where Parks and Recreation received a grant in order to fund a portion of that project, So again, continuing to step through, Section 2 of the plan identifies the advisory committee as the governing body of the plan overall. The committee is made up of the mayor, council president, council finance chair, the senior directors, so Senior Director Vollmer, myself, Mr. Weibensinger, we are on that committee, and then the Director of Finance as well. The stakeholders are largely the different department heads that would bring projects to the advisory committee for review and incorporation into the document itself. Okay, so Tom would bring, Director Comlank would bring the 24 sidewalk program or the street maintenance program to this particular committee, and it would get incorporated into the plan at a variety of different levels. Chief would bring his radio project to this plan or to this committee for incorporation into and prioritization of that project into the plan itself. And then ultimately, we end up before you folks for ultimate adoption of the plan and approval of the priorities set by the committee. So the committee is, it says it right there. It's an advisory committee so that you folks can begin to make decisions based on the work of the committee and not necessarily the work of a department head, a single department head, or a single individual within the city. So the planning process continues with assessing and prioritizing each one of the projects, right? So there is a process that's outlined in the document currently. This is obviously the micro bullets of each one of those items. So the department assesses a project, right? They say this is the need of X project. They put together we're working down in that left-hand column. They put together a worksheet and a justification. They submit that project to staff of the advisory committee. So if it was, that basically would come to Miranda and myself and Corey. We would vet that project as senior directors, and then we would present that project, ultimately, we would present that project to the advisory committee for incorporation into the plan and/or for discussion, if you would. If it continues through the process, it comes to council for action. Council incorporates that item, those projects into the CIP. And then ultimately, that project should follow all of the procurement and legislative processes of council as they exist today. Chief, again, is here to talk about radios today because that is required by the procurement policy that you folks adopted. It's not simply, oh, it's in the CIP, so Chief can buy it. It needs to also follow the procurement policies and the legislative policies set forth by council when they meet certain thresholds. And that's why Chief will end up presenting that later tonight. Capital maintenance. The plan really does go in and discusses capital maintenance. It suggests a minimum allocation towards maintenance. One of the biggest challenges that we currently have is that the deferred maintenance on the infrastructure that we've had for many years has not just gone away, if you would. So what we would expect to see in the first few years and as the plan matures, we would see a lopsided capital maintenance allocation inside of the plan, and we would also see a lopsided priority one items inside of the plan because there is a lot of work that needs done that would rise to the level of either capital maintenance by definition and/or priority one items that need addressed more immediately. But what it also does is it also shifts us from a proactive to a reactive model. In years past, we were very reactive to things for capital maintenance. As part of the mayor's State of the City address, when she showed those lines for street maintenance, and we used to do a lot of crack seal. That was reactive to the budget monies that we had. But now we are a little bit more proactive, and we're able to actually pave and rebuild more streets now because of dedicated issue $12. So that's just one illustration of being proactive versus being reactive in many instances. Exercising fire hydrants is another good example, right? Making sure that we're replacing fire hydrants that are greater than 50 years old. This way we could stay up and not get bogged down in years to come with maintenance on that critical infrastructure. But what that also does is it creates predictable maintenance schedules and predictable maintenance expenses as opposed to how many fire hydrants should we do this year, or how many can we do this year because we have limited resources. If we're currently turning over those life cycle items at some particular point in time, you're starting back at the beginning, and you're just continuing to do the work, and you're not bogged down by the massive amount of work that might need to be done. One of the other things that is outlined in the document is project expiration. There are a few projects that, for whatever reason, and there are a variety of reasons that a project could be stalled. It's not necessarily a product of staff or resources, or just a project has been introduced at some particular point in time, and for whatever reason, it hasn't necessarily come to fruition. Maybe there are other ideas out there that, or other ways to approach a problem that are cost prohibitive, and we studied it, and then all of a sudden it came back as a bigger fix than we maybe thought it did. But we also, at some particular point in time, we may have tied up funds for that project that were never released, and we were just, we'll study it some more. We'll study it a little bit more. Let's remove those funds from that allocation. In many instances, when a project is completely stalled. So I think what the definition of a stalled project is any project that has seen no progress for 24 months or more. A project that is actively being built that might take 3 years to build, 4 years to build. That project is in active status, and those resources are not subject to the project expiration details. But basically, it frees up financial resources to be used to address other priorities and critical needs that are necessary. So continuing down, Section 3 is the project timeline, right? We talked about a 20-year capital plan. One of the things that I added to this particular slide is prior year appropriations, right? So when you guys see the plan, you're going to see the 23 capital budget in there, and you'll be able to identify those items easily, right? But just because an item or a project was identified in 23 and started in 23 doesn't mean you're not going to see it in 24 and 25 or until that project is complete. So prior year appropriations will be identified, obviously. Even if a project was completely funded in 2022 for 2023, you'll still see that project and the status updates of that project inside of the plan. But where we really start is the current 5-year budget. So what you see in parentheses is for the 23 capital improvement plan, you have the current 5 years, which is 2023 to through 2027. These items are largely ready to go or in the implementation phase already. The scope of the project has been properly identified, and budgets and contingencies have also been identified. All right, so in year one of a project, we may be looking to do a study of a particular sewer system or particular area of sewers throughout the city. We will study that, and then we will get a good, better, and best type scenario that comes back to us, and we will plug into the CIP whichever one of those 3 good, better, or best solutions that we choose, that in this instance on the sewer project that the city engineer chooses, to get plugged into the CIP, right? So those are good, firm numbers as opposed to engineering estimates that we've heard a lot about over the last few months, as as it relates to a variety of different projects. As we work down inside of the plan years, right, we get a little bit less detailed, I guess I'll say. Right, so the next 5 years, 28 to 32 in this instance, these projects are largely in planning and in an assessment phase. That's underway, it's being understood, it's being developed, but the budget is based on best known information, right? So those are based on, 2023 items in today's world, but by the time we get to 2028, what does that project really cost, right? There could be some significant differences, especially in today's construction world. And the only summary information that we have is in the summary worksheet only, and we'll see that as we get a couple minutes here. As we get to phase 2, 28 to 32, that should not be duplicated. I apologize for that. That should read, 33 to 37. So I'm one whole cycle off here. I apologize for that. These are being considered for the CIP, right? So, we know we're going to need to address X, let's use servers or IT infrastructure. We're going to need to upgrade server infrastructure in the year 2028, right? So it's being considered for the CIP, but the budget lacks certainty. I cannot tell you what a server switch is going to cost in the year, 2033. If my slide was correct, I'd have that right. And again, the budget worksheet is it's only on the summary worksheet. And then the last 5 years, the 20-year mark, if you would, these are really just visionary type projects. So they lack a fully defined scale and scope of the project. Where we're struggling right now, and when we met as an advisory committee, for us to get projects that fall into the year 2037 and beyond, 2038 and beyond, if my numbers here were correct, has been a little bit of a challenge for us, right? I mean, when we talk about, let's take a community center, for example. Do we really want to put that in year 16, 17, or 18 of the CIP? That's one of the bigger, more resource-intensive projects that have been identified. But when we look at the Parks Master Plan as an example, and the need and the desire, the community desire for a community recreation center, it's hard for us to get that in that phase 3 of the plan. There are, I don't know of, and I should obviously, I could probably dig it up here. If that project doesn't fall in phase 3, it's hard for us to figure out another project that at this particular point does. So we do need to have a little bit further conversation around that phase 3, that years 16 through 20. So as we continue to march through the document here, again, we're still in the first few sections of the document. These sections 4 through 9 of the document take those project categories, so that transportation and mobility, in this particular instance, parks and recreation. And it goes over the category description. So what types of projects would you guys expect to see in that particular section? what are the category goals and objectives, and then it gives you a project summary listing. Okay, we list the projects in 3 different sections, and I'll show you the next section here in a second. This is the first time that we begin to see project-specific information. Okay, so inside of each one of these sections, you would see the project number, the project name, the priority that it was given, the start year, the duration, and so how long do we think that project should take, and the budgetary estimate for each one of these projects. Again, as you go down the start year column, as you get to 25, 26, 27, those budget estimates are more estimates and less known. But this is, again, the makeup of the document on how it's intended to function. Section 10 of the document is the detailed project listings and the detailed project worksheets. So this is where you would see what those cost allocations are, those budget estimates are from year to year to year, what was encumbered in previous years, what you would expect to see in 2023, 2024, 2025, and so on, all the way up to the total amount of the project. One of the things the advisory committee talked about was also having a secondary project listing worksheet where you guys would be able to see exactly which funds were impacted by each one of the projects. So a project could be using issue $12 out of the capital fund, but it could also be using water proprietary funds as another example, and maybe some TIF funds in order to fund 100% of the project. Right now, this particular worksheet would only show you a 100% of the project. But it wouldn't necessarily show you how those funds were being distributed across the variety of funds. The worksheet, however, does, and this is the detailed worksheet, very similar to the CNA worksheets. We do think it is an improvement from that overall worksheet. So it talks a lot about what we've already gone over, the project priority, the project cost, the duration, those types of things, but then it gives an overview of the project. In many instances, the overview needs to be tightened up a bit. There's some project descriptions that are very detailed and very well done, and there are others that are a little bit more general. And even when I've read many of them, I get a little bit confused myself as to what the project is intended to be. So we're working on cleaning those up currently. And then the second box, the one with the yellow highlight, it's very hard to see. I apologize for that, but that's where the detail of the project is really fleshed out. So in this particular instance, and again, what's hard to see up there is you have lines for planning and assessment work as an example. You have, this is a construction project, design and permitting, land acquisition, utility relocation and clearance, construction management, and then construction and inspection services, right? So you guys will be able to actually see a project and see how a project is actually constructed in all of its parts and pieces, as opposed to one single line that says the project is going to cost, in this particular instance, $4.6 million. This happens to be the asphalt street overlay, so there's not a lot of detail that actually falls into the upper portion of the box here. The second set of boxes there, if you would, it says funding sources. You guys might be able to make that out. But what funding sources are being utilized in order to come up with that $4.6 million? Again, street overlays is rather boring from a worksheet standpoint, but basically we're taking, according to this particular worksheet, $513,000 from last year, so we encumbered that money, and then we're using $4.1 million from this year's 2023 budget, which you guys already voted on, at that particular time in order to make that project whole. And there's a project worksheet for all projects that are within the first 5 years of the plan itself. And then the next steps, the last box there is the next steps and updates for this particular project. So if there are any modifications, additions, deletions to this, in this particular instance, as it's street asphalt overlay, it lists each one of the streets that's inside of the document, and that will be updated from year to year to year. So what's next? What are the next steps? You know, we are spending a large amount of time at this particular point developing the work programs that need to inform the CIP, right? So we've spent some time, as an example, well, we'll talk about the continued work plan development in two different ways. We'll talk about it from a Parks and Rec standpoint. The Parks and Rec master plan process that they went through, they really went and walked through their work program and how that work program needed to be developed and what those budget estimates should be. They identified over 70 or 80 different projects for a variety of different years, and they have very good budgetary numbers for replacing playgrounds or adding trails, so on and so forth. The work that they're doing currently is to develop those budget worksheets for each and every one of those projects. The engineering department is another example in their program development, their work program development. They have good worksheets, but they're working more on the budgetary estimates and the engineering estimates for what a particular project should cost. So when we start talking about sewer assessment for the west side, what should that cost, and the good, better, best? They have a worksheet for that already. It was in the CNA, so it's been incorporated into here. But we really need to update and adjust those budgetary numbers to better reflect what those projects actually will be as they work through the process here. We do have to prioritize and do a budget analysis on all the projects, right? Right now, I think the CNA, the last CNA you guys saw was in 2022. I think it identified 500 million or so in capital projects that needed to be completed. So obviously, how do you, when you have limited funds, how do you, budget for and prioritize $500 million in projects when you're only bringing in a very small portion of that each and every year, right? So that work is yet to be done. We do hope to publish, and when I say hope, that's probably the wrong word there. I'm going to strike that word from the record, please. We will publish the CIP in June so that you guys have a chance to see it. We'll do public participation in town hall inside of this particular room. Exactly what that looks like right now is still in conversation. But then that'll all lead up to you guys, council, taking action on the what would actually technically be, and correct me where I'm wrong, but the 2024 capital improvement plan, not the 23 capital improvement plan, in about the August timeframe. There really is, and we spent some time talking about this as the advisory committee, but there's very little reason to actually adopt the 23 capital improvement plan, because basically you have, and I've already adopted the 2023 capital budget. So getting the document to you folks for adoption in 2023 does little except from an administrative standpoint. So you guys would see the 2024 for adoption in a June, July timeframe for adoption. I think we currently have it programmed for the August 1st meeting for adoption. And then ultimately, you guys would adopt the 2024 capital budget, and I said this earlier, but along with the operating budget timeline in that November, December type timeframe. But basically, it's a pickup piece and a put-down piece based on the work that we would have already done and presented to you folks in August. So I know there's a little bit of confusion around that budgetary timeframe there, but we'll work through that or answer as many questions on that as we need to. So that's my last slide, and I'll take a deep breath. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director. As always, appreciate your time and energy and efforts. Questions from council? Ms. Bowers?
Thank you. Just regarding the last item on this last slide here, operating and capital budget adoption, is the vision then that City Council will be adopting a separate operating budget and separate capital budget starting in 2024 and then subsequent years?
They're adopted at the same time.
But they're two separate budgets?
No, you have, it's just the appropriation ordinance like it is now. It includes the capital. So with this, it'll also include that same capital budget and the same appropriation ordinance.
Okay.
But the backbones will be the capital improvement plan that support those numbers that you're adopting as part of that capital budget. But it's all one big appropriation ordinance. It's not going to be you're
Okay.
adopting operating and then you're adopting capital. Still one ordinance that has both.
Okay, thank you.
Well, those are resources. So council's responsible for adopting appropriations. Resources support those appropriations.
Thank you, Joanne.
Mr. Schnetzer?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So not so much a question, but more just a comment, and I would certainly invite my council colleague, President Renner, who also sits on the advisory committee, if he has anything to add to this, or correct me if I get any of this mixed up. But obviously, a lot of information that was covered. Director Schultzen, appreciate that. And of those 4 sections, I would say the bulk of our time at the last advisory committee meeting was spent on the process. And I think there was one graphic that you had put up on the screen that kind of showed, the boxes with the lines connecting them, and where the advisory committee comes in and where the department heads come in. And the reason why I think it's essential to have a firm understanding of that process is obviously going to be followed every single year. That will be, there was discussion about, how often should the advisory committee meet and how often that would be appropriate. And I think the goal of this process is that, one, it is logically defensible, but also that it is, from a mechanical perspective, that it is sound. That if you follow this process, you will ultimately have a document or a capital budget every single year that has a high degree of efficacy. And what I mean by that is there were the various priorities, right? And you mentioned it, that the first capital budget that comes forward by way of this process is likely to be very front-loaded with must-dos and capital maintenance. We're optimistic that if you continue to follow this process, that as you move through time, there will be less of the dollars going towards the must-dos and the maintenance and more towards maybe the like-to-dos or the want-to-dos types of things. But again, the goal here is that every single year this process is followed and you ultimately have a capital budget that comes forward for adoption that, again, has a high degree of efficacy. So I don't know, President Renner, if you have anything you want to add to that or feel I got that right or wrong.
No, Mr. Snetzer, I think you really hit some of the salient points there. And I, too, would like to actually say, Mr. Schultz, thank you very much for the time and effort. The one thing I would like to add, Mr. Snetzer, is on this chart, there's a lot of detail that's probably not being said, and maybe we'll talk about it later. Most specifically to my heart is project presented to advisory committee, and the next box, council action. We talked a lot about communication, and throughout the year that it's not council action at the fall, but council is going to be involved throughout the year. There's going to be reports, updates, that kind of thing, so that we have an ongoing dialogue about what the status is of the current projects and then what's in the pipeline coming up in the next queue. And so that there's this dialogue with council, and then that we can actually give feedback, and that the public can give feedback as we go on. But that's really important between those two boxes.
Yeah, I think the analogy you had used is when Joanne comes forward with their quarterly finance budgets, it would be something akin to that, where there would be some sort of a way station as you move through time of, okay, this is where we are with the projects that you had authorized or approved, and here's some new things that may have come up throughout the course of the year as well. So.
Well put.
Just to follow up on that, so just to understand the timeline and those checkpoints, and to Mr. Renner's point, the development of council feedback. So I heard that the CIP will be published in June, and at that point, public participation in town hall would be determined by the administration. And then. And the advisory group, and that council would take action on the plan in August. So where, could you help me understand where that participation from council comes in terms of involvement with the public, or just so I have an understanding of what's expected?
Yeah, so what's been tentatively discussed is presenting getting you guys the actual written document for that June meeting. I don't know if it's the first meeting or the second meeting. but then have you guys the ability to review that document and then sit before you guys at committee and have you guys ask questions on the document, which then would lead up to the public participation in the town hall. And then when we brought it to you for adoption, there's actually that, presentation, first reading, committee of the whole, and then second reading ultimately for adoption. So there's, I think the way we see it, you guys would have a minimum of, I guess, what did I count there? 3 committee of the whole meetings, but then you also have other committee of the whole meetings where if we needed to have an agenda item very specific to some other conversation that we wanted to have, we had the ability and the timeline to do that, whether that was in June and/or July.
So just thinking that through, if the plan's not ready for publication or for presentation to council, what are the next steps that need to happen through the rest of April and May and possibly the first half of June in order for it to be ready to be out to the public?
So
Or to us, frankly.
Can you read?
Yeah, so what's happening from now to June to when that plan is going to be published? I saw that there, it's marked with draft, so if I could just,
So the first couple bullets here speak to that specifically. So we're continuing that work program development, right? What needs to be done inside of the utility systems in the next, in that next 5-year period, right? What do we really want to see have done?
Okay.
Mr. Stetzer talked about it very well, where we want to bring something to you that has a high quotient of efficacy. So that work continues, and that work will probably continue up until the point in time in which I have to hit send to, Mr. Van Meter so he can get it on the agenda. But then also the prioritization of the projects, right? So we can't bring the capital budget for 2024 can't be all, $500 million worth of projects, obviously. So there's that work that needs done, and then there's the assessment on how does this plan look over the next 5-10 years kind of thing, and do that budget analysis with the finance team in order to see what that looks like year to year to year. Year over year, in order to get it to you folks for in that June timeframe. I don't believe we are very, 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 very close, but yet it's. I would refer to it as being polished at this particular point in time. So whether or not we came on the first committee meeting or the second committee meeting, I still believe that that you guys will see it. You guys will see it in June as a completed document. One of the things we talked about was maybe a portion of the document, something like that. The reality of it is that we're going to blink and it's going to be June.
yeah.
Unfortunately,
Let me just
If I
say
could
thank
too,
you.
when the advisory committee met, I know both Councilman Renner and Councilman Schnetzer had some feedback for us just on some things they wanted to see incorporated into it with regard to identifying funding mechanisms, et cetera. So based on some of the suggestions they have, we need to go back and make some of those revisions as well before it's finalized.
Okay, well then, let me just say thank you for bringing an update to us tonight and introducing the topic to us, because I know that there had been maybe a different apprehensive timeline, and so this helps understand where it is, so I appreciate you coming forward with an update tonight.
I think one of the things that we really realized, to speak to that point very specifically, is that we said by the end of March we would be before you. We realize that it's April. But the other thing that we realize is that we have a 23 capital budget that has been approved in 2022. So why not polish it and put a better product in front of you guys in June as opposed to rushing in March and getting you something that does not necessarily require council action at this particular point in time.
And I'll pigeon PS on you as well. I think this is the first phase in the delivery of the CIP. Because I think it's important to understand, because this is something new for us. So how is it like the CNAs that you have seen before? How is it different than the CNAs that you've seen before? And understanding the extended process that has gone into putting this together and all of the data that has been gathered, certainly over the last 5 years through the various plans that Director Schultz identified that have all been used to inform this CIP, starting from Go Forward Gahanna strategy back in, I think, 2016, up to as recently as the Parks Master Plan, the data that was collected from over 1,000 residents who provided excellent input into the quality of life amenities that really informed, I think, the Parks and Recreation project portion of the CIP. So I think it was, again, important for everybody to understand the process that has been used thus far to put all of this together, so that when you do see it, you can understand what you're looking at, the data that is incorporated by reference, so to speak, within the plan, and what has been used to inform the information that you're going to see. So this is phase one. And I appreciate your comments, Councilwoman. And certainly if we can get it to you before June, we will do that. As he said, as Director Schultz said, I think there's some polish that needs to happen, some suggested revisions made by the two council folks on the advisory committee, and then we'll be back before you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Schultz or maybe Director Burry, can you guys just comment or touch on how that August deadline, for lack of a better word, was derived, and maybe talk about how this first go-round of the CIP feeds into ultimately the budget cycle that we see in the, back third of the year or so?
Way outside of my depth.
So getting it in August, that gives me time to lay in all the numbers, including the resources, which will already be apparent in the document, but really refining that for budget presentation with first delivery end of October, sometime in November is delivery to you, so that way you have more time, again, to look at the budget document itself and its total, including the capital pieces, what the full picture looks like. And I believe there's still 2 hearings on the budget itself, so making sure there's time to have those 2 hearings as well, ultimately to get it past the last formal meeting of council in December.
Thank you. Ultimately, August wasn't an arbitrary, month that we chose. It was specifically chosen because this feeds into everything else that you and your division, your department take care of. So I trust we'll meet that deadline.
I did have one question, and it might be a bit premature. How does the CIP, broadly speaking, take into account both unexpected expenses and unexpected revenue streams? Like, for example, grants. Tough to predict when we're going to see a grant as a possibility, tough to predict when it's going to be awarded, and a lot of times those are for those could-do items, and I'd hate to see opportunities missed for a could-do if we're, obviously we need to be focused on the must-dos and should-dos, but at the risk of missing out on an opportunity, and just that would help my understanding of how that fits in.
Yeah, so I hear 2 parts there, right? It's a great question. You have emergency maintenance, right? So let's say we have a slide or a swing set that gets damaged, windstorm or something like that, right? A slide could easily cost $5,000-$6,000 and meet the thresholds for a capital item. There'll be capital maintenance type items or lines in the CIP that specifically talk to those types of maintenance type items, so that the Parks and Recreation Department in this example would have the ability to go out and have funds allocated towards the replacement of that apparatus. Okay. In your other example of funding has become available and it's a nice to have item, right? We need to have these shovel ready type projects that there's a funding source that we can tap into in order to move that project forward. That's one of the reasons why we have this advisory committee set up. The advisory committee meets. The advisory committee says we've been awarded this particular grant item. We didn't plan to do that item by ourselves until 3 years from now, but we have the ability to advance that. Let's say we need a couple of dollars in order to make that match whole. Let's say it's $1 million project and we have to put in 20% match. We would then, at that particular point, meet as an advisory committee, recommend council action to accept the grant in $800,000, and then come to city council for supplemental appropriation of the $200,000 and launch that project today, as opposed to waiting 2 years to do it and use the $1 million of city resources. So that is, this particular process is outlined in this document, gives us ultimate flexibility to be before you folks on a regular basis to make sure that we're able to stay in lockstep with what might be happening in the state, in the from a federal grant procurement standpoint, and really tee up projects more readily than we have been able to do in the past.
Thank you for that. I think that flexibility is obviously important, but much of what we do is reactionary to the needs that arise, and as much planning is often doesn't go according to plan, as I should say. Thank you. Best laid plans, yes. So thank you for that. Yes, Mrs. Padova.
I have a question for the town hall. What is the plan for communicating, advertising town hall for this? I know in the past sometimes
you're
it's-
ahead of us yet.
Yeah.
I think that we
I'm sure I
still
am.
probably need to have some conversation around what that looks like. But I would imagine that we would do it in multiple ways. We could, everything from social media to website to newsletters. We have the email blasts that go out, referencing it here, community signboards. There are multiple ways that we can communicate that
That
to
was
the
my-
public as soon as we decide a little bit more, vet that out. I knew I was going to do that at some point in 3 years. At some point it was going to happen. That as soon as we have a little bit more of a conversation on what that looks like, and finalize the date. And I think Director Schultz wants the next few weeks as we polish the CIP and we know the exact date when that's coming, then we can set that date as well and better anticipate that.
And for the people who sign up for the agendas and that, they will be getting notifications.
We would
of-
use that
They get
mechanism,
that for
yes.
town halls as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything else from colleagues on this item? Thank you very much, Director. Look forward to hearing more in the coming months. Okay, next up, item C, items from council office. We have a resolution 14-2023, resolution reaffirming the city of Gahanna's commitment to environmental action and recognizing April 22, 2023 as Earth Day. I think for this item, Councilwoman Padova?
Thank you. I worked with President Renner to draft this resolution for Earth Day, and after going to the Simple Times ribbon cutting, I thought it was important to recognize a business here in Gahanna that is doing a really good job at investing in our planet, which is the Earth Day theme, with their goal of zero waste at Simple Times. I think that it is a good opportunity to recognize what they are doing and how they're investing in our planet, and also expanding and still keeping that same commitment. And I've also reached out to have him come and present this to him next week, and I'm waiting to hear back, so hopefully he will be able to do that. But with that, any questions or comments on this?
Thank you very much for your efforts on this. Questions, comments from council? Everyone okay with consent for this then?
Yeah. I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
On the first whereas, I know this is not going to be a popular thing, but it's not that I don't think there is climate change. I really doubt that. What I doubt is that it's man-made, or that there's much we can do about it. But I think it's kind of unsettled, and to state this, that I guess you can state that is, but I don't necessarily agree with it. I'm reading a book that was called Unsettled, and it was by the former Undersecretary of Science for the Department of Energy during the Obama administration, and I've just started in the science of it. But this was recommended to me by a retired three-star general who was a board member of a solar energy company in Colorado. And he said, before you make your mind up on this, read this book. And so probably because of that first whereas, I will not probably support this. Everything else is fine, so.
Thank you, Mrs. McGregor. On for the regular agenda then. All right. Thank you. Next up, item D, items from the Department of Public Safety. Chief, you've got a couple here.
Good evening, council. First item up is the school resource officer contract for the upcoming school year, 23-24 school year. Each year, we bring this agreement before you for adoption and then presented to the Board of Education for their adoption. This year, the total contract term is $217,494 in cost sharing for the salaries, benefits, training, and proportionate overtime of 2 school resource officers anchored at Gahanna Lincoln High School. No substantive changes in the agreement. This represents an approximate almost $9,000 increase over the previous 22-23 year agreement, or 4.3% total increase.
Thank you, Chief. Yes, Mr. Renner.
Thank you. Chief, do we have 3 this year, and now this is going to 2, or it was 2 and a float, or how did that work?
We've always had, for the last number of years, we've had 3 school resource officers. The contract covers the expenses of the 2, a proportionate share of the 2 officers that are anchored at Gahanna Lincoln High School. The third is fully funded by the city. That officer floats to the middle schools, the elementary schools, and also the private schools within
Okay,
the
so we're still
city.
going to have that
Yes,
then?
there's
Okay.
still 3 officers assigned to SRO duties within the division.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Did have a question on this. For the cost sharing, 50% for the first officer and 75% borne by the city, and I'm assuming the other remainder is borne by the school district?
They pay 75% of the cost of one officer,
So-
50% of the cost
I had
of the
it
second
backwards, excuse me.
officer. The remainder of it is borne by the city.
Got
So it's
it.
200, the 217,494 is reflective of that cost-sharing agreement.
Thank you. Apologies for flipping that, so thank you very much. Anything else on this item?
I guess I would like to ask why. Because if there's going to be one that will go to the middle schools and to the other ones other than the thing, why would we not have them spend some money on that?
I think the third officer provides us some flexibility elsewhere in the city that's not solely supporting Gahanna Jefferson schools. They're also supporting St. Matt's and our other private schools. So there's a community focus of that officer. Now, I would say that those officers do float. They do rotate that assignment. So not the same 2 officers on a daily basis are not in Gahanna Lincoln. That third officer, that third position does float.
Well, I'm a believer of the third one, but I just wondered why we would pick up that. But it makes sense to me, it's not that you put it through. Thank you.
Ms. Bowers?
Thank you. Has there been any discussion about expansion of the SRO program, or has the city been approached by the district to potentially expand the number of officers?
There have been no formal discussions on expansion. It was briefly touched on in our town hall when we had the safety forum that we had with the superintendent and many of the building principals. If we were to expand that program, and I think, we probably would have some discussions with the school as the opening of the new building. That building is a considerably larger footprint than what we currently operate within. I wanted to go back to Mrs. Angelou. You know, that third officer does provide an element of relief factor because the contract does mandate that we have those 2 officers there, and there are training requirements and some other things that are stipulated in a companion MOU that between the division and the superintendent's office that we're just now finalizing. But you know, it does offer a relief factor. So if an officer, if one of the school resource officers is in fact sick, that third officer can act as an element of relief factor for those that are anchored in the building. But
Thank you.
yes, I think we'll probably have further discussion as this building project gets closer to opening, because that is at a considerably expanded footprint than what we're operating in now.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. I'll just say briefly, as a proud GLHS grad myself, I remember the officers being in the building and the wonderful interactions they had with students, including myself. For me, it was Officer Blamer, who we see around City Hall. So a fixture of the community, both inside the schools and out. And so I think it's a wonderful program. Happy to support it. And speaking of support, are folks okay with first and then consent on this? All right, thank you. Next item, Chief, please.
The second action item actually is a capital request. I think Mr. Schultz did hit on a number of things. This is related to this request. It is for the authorization to purchase portable radios and firmware upgrades for Motorola Solutions. This is specifically related to our portable radios, our handheld radios. They're in about a 7 to 8 year life cycle management window. They are coming due for replacement. There are a number of factors, including certain firmware requirements that the state is mandating for subscribers to the Multi-Agency Radio Communication System, or MARCS. That's how our radios communicate. We're a subscriber to the state's system. They mandate certain system requirements. Our radios, due to their age, also they're aging out of their warranty period. They'll no longer be able to be. They will no longer be able to be serviced at the end of this year, necessitating this forklift of our portable radio platform. Based on a dollar amount in excess of $250,000, we need council authorization based on the procurement rules passed by council. All this entire purchase will be done in accordance with Ohio State Term contract, and we're requesting authorization to expend those dollars. Again, it was included in our capital needs assessment, included in our 23 budget for this purpose.
Thank you, Chief. Colleagues? All right. Everyone all right with first and consent then? All right, thank you very much, Chief. Before we adjourn, there's been a request to go back to the resolution item, 14-23. Mr. Schnetzer, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So I really do appreciate you honoring the request there. I understand we're kind of skipping around here a little bit. I'm of the view that a goal of a resolution should be that it isn't necessarily contentious. So rather than putting forward something that doesn't necessarily reflect all of council's thoughts or opinions, I'm wondering if there isn't some opportunity here to maybe massage the language a bit so that we can get greater consensus amongst, everybody that's sitting up here at the dais. So in some respects, I'm wondering, Councilwoman McGregor, is there a rephrasing of that first whereas that would accurately reflect your sentiments? So, for example, in my understanding of climate change, by no means am I a scientist, it is resulting in, say, one challenge is desertification of certain areas, right? So things are drying out in certain areas. It's kind of reducing arable land across the globe. As I drive up Route 23, going up to Lake Erie sometimes, that all used to be farmland, right? That's clearly not a sustainable practice. We can't continue to lose arable land in some places and consume arable land for housing. I don't know that's going to be an issue during my lifetime, but I think by definition, if you were to project it out on a long enough timeline, it's not sustainable. So would it be amenable to perhaps rephrase that first whereas to just simply acknowledge that there are challenges that communities are facing because of climate change, and we commit to trying to reduce those to the extent that we can, so, you know, something along those lines. Again, I don't necessarily want to put words in anybody's mouth here, but I'm just wondering, in the spirit of trying to get a 7-0 vote on a resolution, is there a way that this could be
That would
rephrased?
probably be the case. It's not that I don't, like I say, it's not that I don't think that the climate isn't changing. I'm just saying that I'm not sure I believe that man has caused it, or that necessarily that we can do anything to stop it or change it, because climate changes all the time, and it has for millions of years. And so that would probably be all right, what you said. I'm thinking like, I don't know what, that's, everything else is fine. I don't have a problem with any of the others than the first whereas.
Perhaps we could just take that whole thing out.
Well, I mean, if you say that, you know, there are changes that are brought about by climate change, I mean, that's a fact. There are changes that are brought,
Challenges.
yeah, challenges because of climate change. That's true. I mean, I don't disagree with that statement.
And that those and so, I mean, as it feeds into the rest of the document, those challenges increase the necessity for sustainable approaches to things. Is that a fair and accurate way to present it?
Yes, but I don't want to change, if everybody else thinks it's, I mean, I don't want to make everybody else change it, you know, unless, if they think it's fine, I mean, I don't mind being the only one saying no.
Well, my
I
own
appreciate
thoughts
it,
are, and
though.
I've had the document up here for, 15, 20 minutes throughout the meeting, just trying to read through it. I go back to a year ago. I felt like the first one was very heavy on climate, and again, maybe I'm just an old soul. I remember, being in grade school, Earth Day was focused on, litter cleanups and planting trees and those types of things. As everyone up here at the dais is very aware, one, community amenity that's very near and dear to my heart is Big Walnut Creek that runs right through the center of the city. I've witnessed, people literally dumping yard waste into the creek. I've seen evidence of people pouring paint down our storm drains when there's stains on the storm drain grates themselves. Those are very local things that I think we should discourage and maybe raise awareness of. And I'm wondering, again, is this an opportunity, this type of resolution, to maybe not highlight those specific egregious examples, but in section 3, down at the bottom, it says this council encourages residents and businesses to invest in our planet by taking steps towards a more sustainable lifestyle. Maybe we can add in reducing pollution and, enjoying our, natural resources or something to that effect. That's kind of where my mind goes when I think of Earth Day. It's less the global and more, I suppose, the local immediate environmental impact.
That's true, because when I've talked to school groups about sewers, and I would take in maps of storm sewers and sanitary sewers, and they're all like, really? There's more than one kind of sewer? I mean, they don't think that the storm sewer, there's nothing that filters that water from the time it goes into the gutter till it goes into a creek, and they just don't realize. It's not that they're trying to do it on purpose, they just don't think about it.
So maybe that doesn't give us a nice clean thing to essentially move on to the next stage in the legislative process, but more just a thought. Seeing if anybody here has some suggestions for language that gets us closer to a 7-0 on this.
Ms. Badova?
I appreciate the comments, and I would also share the sentiment that I would like it to be 7-0. I'm not sure what, I understand exactly what the language is that you want would like to see in the first whereas, because it doesn't say anything specifically that it's man-made, or I guess the issue that you brought up about that you're not sure you believe. I don't think that belief is in that first whereas. So I'm open to suggestions. I haven't really heard anything specific, though.
So how about this, since I obviously made the ask to revisit this, if that first whereas simply said something to the effect of, and I'll defer to Mr. Van Meter here as the wordsmith to maybe tighten this up a little bit, something to the effect of this council recognizes the challenges that, climate change climate change poses, and we're committed to, sustainable best practices or something like that.
That'd be okay.
The fact that climate change is a critical issue.
Fair enough.
Okay. Climate change is a critical issue facing Earth's family of nations. Is that acceptable to keep, or just?
It is a critical, I don't think it's the most critical. If you want to say it's the critical, but I don't think it's the
So
most
the-
critical.
Acritical.
Pardon?
Acritical.
A critical.
So I think
Okay, a critical.
A critical issue.
Mr. Clerk, does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand the intent of Mr. Schnetzer's comments and Ms. McGregor's as well.
Well,
Is that,
I think we backed up and actually just said, instead of changing anything drastically, but we said, instead of saying the single most critical, we can just say a critical issue. Is that
So is-
correct?
Yeah, that's okay.
So we leave the word Earth in our Earth Day resolution? Can we do that? I mean, a year ago, I gave a presentation which I thought was actually pretty good and backed up by scientific evidence. One of the most upsetting things to me is that science has become politicized.
Exactly.
And for anyone to actually ignore science data that putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere is changing our planet, for you to ignore that is just outrageous.
But you're not the only science major up here.
Again, you have not presented any scientific evidence to the contrary, and none of the naysayers have. So, what?
Mr. Schnetzer?
Yeah, so the last 30 seconds are, I guess, are fundamentally at the heart of my trepidation over just moving forward with it currently as written. I think we have to recognize that we live in a very, our political climate is elevated right now, and there's not consensus among the electorate. And I think for us to sit up here and say that, to jam anything down anybody's throat, whether it's a member of council or a member of the community is a bit foolish. And I understand that there are passions on both sides of this. I think we, as policymakers, as leaders in the community, need to recognize those passions. And is there a way that we can communicate this message in a way that doesn't inflame some of those passions? Again, I would agree with Ms. Bowman. Nowhere in that first whereas does it say, I think explicitly that it's man-made. But I think being cognizant of those passions, it's certainly implied. And again, is there a way that we can communicate them? I think effectively what we want is we want residents to take more care of the local environment. How can we have a resolution or a policy statement that has that call to action without being ignored by 50% of the population because of how they read the document? That's essentially, I think, what our goal should be here. And I'm wondering if the tweaking of a couple of words don't help us to create better policy, better legislation.
I'm fine with that.
I'm hearing that we will strike single most critical, or the single most, and substitute a critical issue. Okay, thank you. And that will work for you, Mrs. McGregor?
So we'll.
Mr. Schnitzer?
I think there can be some reference to, we acknowledge the challenges that it poses, or that it,
Is that all right? Yeah. Okay. Jeremy, will you add that reference in, or Mr. Clerk, will you please add that in? Sure. Thank you.
do we want anything in section 3 about, mitigating pollution, taking greater care of the environment or anything like that? Again, it just simply, I think the only reference is invest in, it's kind of generic. There's a lot of talk about sustainability.
Composting.
I'm fine with that.
Mr. Clerk, our resident wordsmith, would you please circulate any edits that you might make?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Do we still want this on the regular agenda, or can we move it to the consent agenda? Consent is fine? All right. Consent, please, Mr. Clerk.
I appreciate that, thank you.
No. Thank you, Mrs. McGregor. No. Anything else before we adjourn? All right, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. We're adjourned.